Go ahead, go on.
All right. Let me know when you see my screen.
All good. I can see a screen.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. So, so let's start with the session 2 today. So the agenda for today's session is about the general Salesforce security model. We are going to discuss about the profiles, permission sets, and how do you set dog by defaults, and how do you override those dog by defaults with the sharing settings and other permissions from the Salesforce. So before jumping into the topics, I would like to highlight we have our chatter group in the success community. So anyone today new can go ahead and join this group. You constantly get updated about the next sessions. And also please welcome other members, the other contacts which you know who want to learn about the certifications and also about the platform. Yeah, we'll be continuously hosting sessions both on developer track and admin track going forward. All right, so let's jump into the topics straight away. So this sessions will not be of scripted fashion. We don't have any slide presentations. We are just going to go over each topic. I'm going to explain like practically what it is on Salesforce. So you might find few topics repeating again and again in few other sessions. That's because those topics are very important for the exam point of view in terms of admin track. So the topics which I'm going to repeat, since it is not a complete scripted presentation, every week it could be different examples, different scenarios, so that I just want to cover up all the use cases. If I keep repeating the topics, I can come up with different use cases whenever I start with those topics. So that it will give you a much more broader use case examples for the exams. All right, so going into the security model. So Salesforce platform as a cloud platform, security is a very big aspect for Salesforce, right? We control Salesforce security in different forms. So the first level of security would be the org-wide defaults. So that's where you limit the access to data for any user who's logging into the system. So let's see what is org-wide default. So usually this org-wide default means, say, as you know, Salesforce has different objects in the system. So objects are just imagine as database tables. In a conventional database, it's like the tables. So you have rows and columns, and each row is represented as records, and each column is represented as fields. So if you have an Excel sheet and you have rows, and each row will be represented as a record in the system, and the columns which you see in the Excel sheet, those will be the fields. So the whole sheet, one particular sheet, is represented as object. So if you want to have a understanding about how objects are in Salesforce, objects is nothing but a table with rows and columns. And so to give access to this objects, right? So when you open Excel sheet, in a conventional method, you can set up a password, right? So when you open an Excel sheet, if you want to access this Excel sheet, someone can protect you with a password, so that only if you know the password, you can access the whole data inside that sheet one or sheet two. So that's similar way how we do it here. So instead of password, we have different layers of security in Salesforce. The first layer is the login and password, obviously. So that is for the whole. Just imagine like giving access to your Excel sheet file itself. So it's like keeping your data inside a folder and giving you access to the whole folder. And once you open the Excel sheet, you need access to the sheet separately. So you could be a member of the team and you don't want to have access for sheet 3 and 4, and you only need access to sheet 1 and 2. So where I can protect sheet 3 and 4 with the password and sheet 1 and 2 with a different password. So you know the password only for sheet 1 and 2. So when I say sheet 1 and 2, it's similar to objects in Salesforce. So
Mhm.
you have 4 objects in Salesforce, and I don't have to give you access to all the 4 objects. You just need access to only 2 objects. So that's like object level permission. And if even if you have access to those objects, if I say, hey, I don't want this person XYZ to see any data that belongs to others. So that's where this argv default comes in. So I can say for the whole object, just mask all the data except for his own data.
Mhm.
So let's see how we can set up that. So let's assume, as we know, Salesforce has default objects like accounts and contacts. So let's take one example like accounts and contacts. And here is the argv default you will see. So if you see here the first column represents this objects, and the second one represents the default internal access, and the third column represents the default external access. So the default internal access is like when you log into Salesforce and what type of access you should have. Default external access is like there are few ways you can expose these objects outside Salesforce. Like you don't have to log in into Salesforce, but still you can give access to those people to see the records and without logging into Salesforce. So that's a very big concept. That's a separate concept where you will give permissions to communities and sites. So I'll come back to those topics later when we really start working on those use cases.
Yeah, Guha.
So
So
for
I
now,
for those who just joined, I posted the Who Sees What series. I just put it into the chat. I highly recommend watching that at least three times. It really helps to understand this concept that Guha is teaching you, and you can, once you watch that about 3 or 4 times, it'll make a lot more sense as to why these sharing settings exist for in an organization. So go ahead and bookmark that, and watch it before taking the exam. Go ahead, Guha. I didn't mean to interrupt.
no worries. That's really good information. And one more thing, if you guys are getting confused with how the objects and fields, just plain on a plain context, just imagine as an Excel sheet. So just get into that mode of understanding so that you'll once you get used to the system in Salesforce, then you will start thinking in object and fields concept. But when someone is new to Salesforce completely to the platform, sometimes it get confused like why it is object, why it is fields. So object is nothing but a table, and fields are nothing but the columns. And here, if you see, we were talking about the internal and external access. So just for now, imagine that internal access is having a Salesforce login as a user, and you log in into the system, and then you go to an object and you see the list of records. And external access is like exposing a custom built community page where you don't have to log in. You just click on a link, and then the page opens up with a list of records. So that's external access. And if you see here, account, contact, and assets. So it's these three are like interlinked objects. So that's why it's combined together. But you can just assume it as accounts. So when I click on edit, so when I set this default access to private, so what it means is that this account is accessible only by the owner of the record.
Good. Hmm.
And for example, if I have to say owner of the record in the same Excel context, so when you enter some data into your Excel sheet, so the person there'll be a column called owner column, and the owner will be the sole proprietor of that particular record. And there are many objects that will have ownerships, And there are custom objects which do not have like a particular dedicated owner field, but still you can create a field of a user type and then assign like as a owner. But by default, account, contacts, opportunities, all these objects will have a ownership, and that ownership decides who should see what data.
Mhm.
And when you're a logged in user, say you are a user X and you're logging into the system, and let's say you have created 5 records in the system in accounts under the account table, and you want to see if I set this to private, you can see only the records you have created in the system, but still there could be hundreds of records which was created by other people. You cannot see those records. So that's what private means. Private means it's only your data. And the next one is like public read only. So which means you have access to your data. So by default in the system, always you have access to your data. When you create a record in the system, you have access to that data until the ownership changes. If you explicitly go and change the ownership to Gavin or Guha, then only the record becomes out of your ownership, and then you cannot see the data. That's when it is in the private sharing model. So when it is in a public read only, I can still see my own records. At the same time, I can see other records in a read only mode. So I can see and edit my records. I cannot edit other records, but I can see other records. So it's like extending one step of visibility on the records. So I can see hundreds of records, out of which I can edit only my records. And others records will be in the read-only mode. And if you see the next one, public read-write, it's pretty self-explanatory where you see all the records available in the system and you can edit any of those records. And if you are going for any project implementation, so what should be the sharing model you should be choosing? So it basically depends. So when your requirement is about all about accounts, and if your customers are like business customers, and if you want define a territory for your customers, then that's where you will set it to private. Say now, let's assume you're building a system and you don't have to have uh, any of the security concerns like they're just building a system to represent a list of records where they don't have any requirements based on the logged in user, or if they don't have any requirements related to who sees what. So let's assume in your requirement gathering session, if you don't hear about like who sees what concepts,
Mhm.
means like literally they don't have any requirements like, yeah, I don't want to control anything with respect to the users. I don't care who sees what.
Yeah.
If that's the case, you can set it to public read write. And to my knowledge, 99% of the projects will not be the case,
Yeah.
because you always need a security model to secure your data, unless until it is like very public application and everyone wants to see everyone's data and edit that everyone's data. That's like literally it's a bad decision to give public read write.
Mhm.
But still, if the app demands, then you can go ahead with that. But always the best practice is sticking with the private sharing model, so that you provide ownership only to the people who owns that record. And on top of it, if they have additional requirement like, hey, I want to give ownership only to the owners of the record, and on top of that I want to give some record access to certain group of people. So that's a different case where you will first set it to private here, and then on top of it, you will mount another provisioning logic where it will tell this set of records can be viewed by this set of people. So that will not be done in this organization-wide default. So this is like a base layer. You will set the security settings,
Mhm.
and on top of it, you're giving the keys to a set of people, so the doors are still locked, but you will give a key to them, to a particular group of people, where they can open the door. Without that key they cannot open the door. So that key the concept of the key will come in the later part of the session. I'll explain you. But for now, setting up the base layer is this organization-wide default. It's always private for any of the requirements usually, until unless app really doesn't care about the security model, then you go with public read, right? Or public read only. So these are all based on your judgmental capabilities. So it's all up to you. These are the three options Salesforce is providing, and it's how you want to design your application. So that's organization-wide default. So this is the base layer for all the objects you will set up, and also you can set up some sharing rules. So which will come back to this again after explaining a couple of other concepts. So going back again, let's see if I have any dependent topics I have to cover for this. Yeah, I think we are good on this. So this is all about organization-wide defaults. So let's go to profiles and permissions and then come back to another concept of sharing these records. So profiles, I think people who listened in for the last session would have got an idea what is profiles, but I'll just give a quick recap on what is profiles.
Yeah,
Profiles is like
definitely going to be on the exam, so you want to take good notes.
right. So whenever I repeat any topics repeatedly in 2 or 3 sessions, you can implicitly understand that these topics will be the exam point of view topics. Any topics which I don't explain beyond 1 session are really less important for the exam point of view. So profiles is basically, it's a little meaning profiles. So when you look at websites like Google or you go to Facebook, you have your own profile. So profile is basically putting like a suit and code for yourself. You are a user in the system and you have certain permissions and you have certain outlook for yourself inside the system, who you are and how you are represented in the system. So that's what profile will define, and also profile also will define you what kind of access you have in the whole system. So like I said, the base security model for the whole org is the org-wide default. So that's on the object level. So on the user level, we are defining a base security model. So that's profiles. And next concept will be the permission sets. So the difference
I can do
between
the permission sets, Guha. You can pass that to me.
yeah, sure. I'm just quoting the difference between those two.
Okay.
So the profiles and the permission sets are different. So that the exam questions will be mostly on where you will use profiles and where you will use permission sets. And the questions will be more targeted like whether you really need to go with permission sets. And for certain scenarios, you have to use only permission sets instead of profiles. And as a best practice in Salesforce, always have the profiles like a baseline security criteria, and then permission sets are like additional permissions that you will assign for the particular user. For example, say I'm a let's choose a profile here. I'm not sure if I have a standard user. Yeah. So we have a standard user profile. So let's assume this is a user. We have certain users under standard users, and these users, let's add a user. Oops. I think I didn't have any users. Just give me a minute. I will assign one of the users. Yeah, this is one place you will change profiles for a user, and also profiles are aligned to certain licenses. So in reference to the licenses, these set of profiles will differ. Certain profiles are not provisioned for certain licenses. So if you choose Salesforce licenses, these are all the profiles you can assign to those Salesforce licenses. If you choose Salesforce platform license, you can do only standard platform user. Now let me assign standard user one. So, so now in profiles, I have a profile called standard user one. So that is a custom profile. You can create your own profiles and you can give permissions to those profiles. So if you see in the assigned user, we have one user, and so I have when I first create this user in the system, I would create this user and assign a profile to it. And once you go to the profile, you will have a lot of options for that profile. So let me explain you all the options here. So you can give access to one particular app in the profile. So app is nothing but when you go to this app launcher in the Lightning experience. So you see all these topics here. So these are all the applications which we have out of box from the Salesforce. At the same time, there are a couple of applications which are custom applications like the case agent, business hours, GoAdForce. These two are like custom applications which I have designed. So application is like it's like app in your iPhone. So you have iPhone and you have your general settings as just consider like iPhone is your environment, and the settings is your profile, and these iCloud account will have a particular set of apps assigned in that particular phone, right? So that's how this whole profile works for the assigned apps. So you can assign app to a profile so that only those users under the profile can access this app. Anyone in different profile cannot see the app itself on the app launcher. And similarly, it goes for all the components in the system. Like you can assign objects, you can assign Apex classes, you can assign Visual Force pages, and there are many other components which you can assign. And there is one more place where it's called system permissions. We will come back to that later. So for now, let's go to the object settings. So when you start implementing a Salesforce project, you would create a profile. And for profile, if you see here, it will be more similar to what you saw in the org-wide defaults. But org-wide default is like on the object, you are like making an engraving on the object that this object should be accessible only to those ownerships. But in profiles, apart from ownerships, who else can access that object? It's not about the records. Again, I'm talking about the edit and view access for the object. So this could be a little confusing. So don't confuse with the org-wide default and this one. This is for the this is for the in terms of Excel sheet. This is for the sheet access, and that org-wide default is for the data inside the sheet.
Mhm.
So when you want to see the records in the sheet, that's where you do go for the org-wide default. When you want to see the sheet itself, so when I want to protect the whole sheet itself, I would say, hey, hide this whole sheet from the user's view. So let's say sheet one is the account table, and if I want to, if I completely want to hide the access for account table, so what I will do is I will go ahead and choose accounts here under profiles, and I would say, click on edit. I would say if you see here the object permissions, so object is nothing but table I told in terms of database. So I would say remove all the read permission, which will cut down all the permissions because I don't even have a read permission to that object. You can also specifically give like a create permission, or you can remove the read permission. You can just give edit and delete permission. So it is completely based on your necessity for that particular project. So why do we cut down the whole object level access here is, for example, let's consider this standard user one profile is the only profile in the whole system, and you want those users, it's the only profile in the system, and you have like hundreds of users under that profile, and you will sometimes you might have like 10 different teams being part of that 100 users. Say first 10 users belong to team 1, the second 10 users belong to team 2. So team 1 will be working on certain business areas, and team 2 will be working on certain business areas. And if your business requirement is like team 1 should not be looking at my accounts at all, I don't want to give them access to the accounts at all, then that's where you will decide, okay, so let's do this. Let's when you have this whole set of 100 users and you don't want to give access to one to the object for one particular set of users at all, or if you want to give access to that object to only one particular set of users, so that's where you will decide, well, let's disable the whole object permissions for all the users, for hundreds of users. So how do you provide access to the the remaining set of users? That's where the permission sets will come into play. So Gavin will be explaining you more detail about how permission sets work. But permission sets is like another top layer on top of the profiles, which will give only additional access. So I'm stressing on the additional access because there could be questions in the exam where the questions can be targeted in a way that whether you can cut down access through permission sets. No, you cannot cut down access through permission sets.
Mhm.
So profile becomes the base layer. Once you give whatever you give in the base layer, on top of it, you can give additional access to the objects and the fields, but you cannot cut down any existing access from the profile. So profile is the only place you can cut down the access for objects and fields. Any field visibility, or if you want to hide a field from a particular user, say let's say we have accounts here. Let me give all the permissions in the accounts, and I want to hide only one particular field. Say I want to hide the field demo2. So I can remove all the read access and edit access.
Mhm.
And also, if you see, if you want to show all the fields on the layout for the particular user, and you don't want to give him edit access, even though if there is a edit button, if you don't want them to click on any of the fields and access the data, you can simply remove all the edit permissions. Or if you want to make certain fields read only on the page layout, you can just remove this edit access here and keep only the read access. So that's how you control the edit permission on the page layout for a field. And if you want to have a similarity between profiles and permission sets will look similar how you configure here. This whole layout will look similar in the permission sets as well. As I told you,
Mhm.
permission sets, it's another version of profiles to give additional access. So Gavin will give you certain use cases where you can use permission sets instead of profiles.
Sounds
So that's how your profiles work. And yeah, Gavin, I'll leave it to you to take on to the permission sets.
okay. All right. So, like Guha mentioned, can now everyone see my screen? Great. All right. So, like Guha mentioned, he showed you what a profile is. So, I'll give you an example of this sales user. So, this sales user on your screen has read, create, and edit, and on the leads object. But now we don't want to give all the sales users access to delete leads and transfer leads. We just want to give a couple of sales users that access and exclude all the others. So how you would do that is by using a permission set. And let me show you how that is configured. So when you go into your setup, you will see this option under administration users. you will see this option called permission sets. What you do is you can create a you can create a permission set. For example, let's do system admins, and you can add a user. See, it looks very much like a profile. So you can you can manage user assignments in here, and you can add users to this permission set. So let me show you what permissions the system admin has. No, not data properties. So in this permission set, you can you can add available apps into this permission set. You can go down the list. One second. Bear with me. You can add connected apps. You can go into the object settings just like a profile and make give access to certain objects. So that way, not every sales user gets access to these objects. Only the sales users on that particular permission set will get access to. For example, you want a sales user to access a campaign, but you want to exclude all the other sales users. You can read access to certain campaigns, edit, and give them a read access to give a set of sales users read access to campaigns. And then once you are given access to campaigns, you go to manage assignments and you add that sales user. Say, hey, I want I want this person Trin to have access to this salesperson to have access to campaigns. So only Trin has access to campaigns, the others don't. Is that clear? Okay, great. Moving on to
Yes.
great. So moving on to the next topic, uh, we have go ahead. Did we go over field accessibility and sharing settings?
Yeah, so field, do you want to take up the field accessibility? I can take the sharing settings.
Sure. So field accessibility is uh, you'll also hear this as field level security. So one way you can access fields is when you go into your object. For example, let's go into the account. You have fields and relationships. You can access, for example, the account the account source field, right? So you can see your field accessibility here as well, and you can also set your field level security on the object. You see, there's hidden. You can make it read only. You can make it required. You can do it per object. Guha, do you know how to do this on a system-wide uh, on a system-wide angle instead of just per object? Because this is how I've been doing it in on my projects.
Okay, so this one, so you can either go to this way of like doing it for each field, or also you can go to the profiles. Can you go to profiles, Gavin?
Sure.
So the field level accessibility is always aligned to profiles if you go into the field for each field. So for example, if you have a combination of profiles and permission sets you're using for your application, so you need to ensure that the field level changes, I mean, the field level visibility changes, whatever you're making, it's added to both the profiles and permission sets. And also, this becomes a good example of why to use permission sets rather than profiles for field level accessibility. So the general best practice in Salesforce is like always give permissions for the objects and field levels in the permission sets rather than in the profiles.
Files.
So that is because you can specifically control different you can specifically control these field level access and object level access to one particular place instead of doing it at both in profiles and permission sets. Let's assume like you have one profile, say profile one, and that profile has like hundreds of users, and each group of 10 users are using different permission sets. Say first group will have only edit access in accounts, second group will have both edit and delete access in accounts, third group will have just a read access in accounts. So the requirement would be like, I want like 100 field directors in the system. So the field directors, that becomes a profile. So you'll create a custom profile called field directors, and after creating the profile, you will say first 100 field directors wants only edit access in accounts. They should not have read create access. They should not have delete access. And you would say second 10 field directors will have create access only in the account, and they cannot edit, they cannot delete. And the third set of 10 users, 10 field directors, they can have like all the three permissions. So that's where permission sets will come into play, where you create a base profile called field directors, and it's just a label. Field directors is just a label. So you create a base profile. You don't give any permissions on the object. You disable all the permissions there, and you create like 3 permission sets. So one permission set's dedicated for first 10 users, and similar to profiles, you will add users to the permission sets. So that's totally fine. So now when you want to change access for user one who will be in the first group, and if for example if that field director is changing his role from being a field visitor to like a desk job, but he's still in the field director role, but his responsibilities are changing. So when his responsibilities are changing, his access to the objects also should change. So the first group had only edit and create edit and delete access. The second group had only create access. So now when he is moving from the field visit officer to like the desk job, so he will just create a record in the system, and he don't need edit access because he's not going to the field and visiting it. So he's just going to create a placeholder for all other agents who's going to the field and visiting it. So that's where he will need a create access all of a sudden from next week. So how will you do that? So if you have just profiles, you cannot do that because you need to classify 10 users inside that same profile. So obviously you need to have permissions. So another bad way of doing that is you'll be giving permissions both in profiles and permission sets. Because if now we have to change, you have to change in both the places. And if you forget to change in one places, that will mess up all your configuration.
Yeah.
So that's why it's always best to have either just the object level permission in the profile, or don't give any permissions in the profile. Just keep the profile as a base layer and mount a permission set on top of it so that you can control all the access in one place. And so yeah, coming back to the field level access. So if you go to the permission sets on any permission set, you will see this 2 level of access. One is the object permission, if you see in there, and if you can scroll down, so you will see the field permissions. So this is another way to control your fields, like which fields I need read access, which fields I need edit access. When I say read access, it is also similar to the visible checkbox which you saw on the field. So you can do at two places. When you create the field, it will automatically ask for each profile what type of visibility you need to give. But the caveat there is you cannot you cannot see permission set level permissions
Yeah.
when you create the field. You can do only for profiles at that point of time,
Yeah.
because permission set is something you define in the system. Profiles are something, without a profile a user cannot exist in the system at all. It's like mandatory step, you have to assign to a profile, right? So that's why the field, whenever you create a field, they're giving, Salesforce is giving you an option to, hey, choose whatever visibility you want to give for that profile. If you don't want to give visibility to profile, remove the visibility to that particular field when you start creating the field, and then come back to the permission set, specifically give read or write access to that field based on your requirement. So you can do it two ways, but field level access, giving the field level access in the field creation time, that will restrict you only to the profile level. You cannot see the permissions given in the permission sets for those fields.
Let me show you
So
an example. So I'm
yeah,
creating this test check field, checkbox field, and right here I can, set the visibility, but that's only at the profile level. I can't do it at the permission set level here. So that's what Guha was talking about. See, I only have the field level security for the profile. Is that clear?
and yeah, can you continue on this screen? So one more thing, stop here. So go to the previous screen. So another thing, that this visible and read-only column, if you see here, there is no edit access here. So this means it's just the visibility you're giving to the user. It doesn't have anything to do with your edit access, create access, or delete access. So for all those access, again, you have to go back to, even if you have just the profiles, you don't use any permission sets, even then you have to go back to the profile and ensure that you have all the edit and delete access provision properly for that particular user.
Mhm.
So this is only the visibility level, and uh, since visibility is like covered, visibility is just a subset of all those edit, create, and other access. So it's coming up on the field creation time, and also you can control specifically when you go into that particular field, and you can do just visible or read only. But then if you want to give edit and read access, you have to come back to either profile or permission set based on what you have configured in the system. And can you go to the next screen, Gavin?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so there is next one that is also an important step. Good, click on next. So once you give field level visibility, which means like you're telling the system that, hey, I want I want this particular profiles to see this field. So where do you want to see this field? That's another question, right? So that's where this screen comes in. So where you want to enable this field. So when you check these checkboxes, add fields to these layouts. These are like page layouts. So page layouts, I'll come back to that later. Page layout is like to tell you a real life example. It's like it's a similar layout which you see on the page. Like I want to see these set of fields on the left hand side. I want to see these set of fields on the bottom of the screen, top of the screen, and these details should come on the sides. So all those configurations becomes the layout changes. So you're basically configuring your whole page layout for that particular screen. So if you click on an account record, and the account record will show certain information on certain areas, and you won't be seeing certain fields on the layout. So that all those are controlled through the page layouts. We'll come back to that topic later, like maybe next session.
Mhm.
But for now, just imagine that if you check these checkboxes here, that field will by default be visible on the page layout. Doesn't matter where it is visible, but it will be visible on the layout.
Mhm.
And if you remove these checkboxes, the fields will be hidden from the layout, but still you can drag and drop those fields into the layout when you configure the layouts separately. But this is like it's like spoon feeding you that whenever you create a field, you give access to the page layout as well, so that you don't have to go to the page layout and separately configure dragging and drop the fields there. So if you think that this field should be available on the layout, you can provision it when you start creating the field itself. If you think you want to decide it later, you can remove this checkbox here on the page layout options, and then you can go to specific page layout and then drag and drop those fields. So it's all up to you. But this is just like another additional provisioning from Salesforce that they give you. So
Thank
that's
you.
about field visibility. You give two types of visibility. That is, the field should be visible to the user at the same time where it should be visible, the place.
Do you want to take over sharing settings, Goa?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let me hand the presenter back to you.
Okay, so let's go to sharing settings. So for now, excuse me. So for now, whatever we discussed on permissions, profiles, field visibility, just keep them aside. That has nothing to do with this sharing settings. But this sharing settings has something to do with the organization-wide defaults. So let's recap on what we discussed on organization-wide defaults. So organization-wide defaults, as I told you, this is the base level access you give for this particular set of records inside an Excel sheet. It's not the access to the Excel sheet. It's like after you go into the Excel sheet, what type of records you want to see. So that level of access. And on top of this, let's assume a use case before I explain what it is. Say I have an Excel sheet. Let's assume a table. I have a table of accounts, and I have like 100 records in that table, 100 table rows in that. And out of the 100 rows, I have created 10 rows, and others have created like the remaining 90. So I have ownership to only 10 rows in the system. And when I say my account should be, so let's do this. Let's configure this sharing setting. So I'm setting the org-wide default for accounts as private. So which means I'm telling any user logging into the system can see only their own accounts. They cannot see others' accounts. And now what happens is, for example, Gavin logs into that system and he goes to account object, and he can see only the 10 records which he has created, and he cannot see the rest of the 90 records. And if I want to say, Gavin should be able to see one particular set of records which belong to, say, a role of VP, or which belong to a public group. So what I want to say is, keep the accounts private still. Gavin should see only Gavin's records, and on top of it, in additional to that, he can see sales team's records also. So which means Gavin can have access to 10 records, and there might be sales team records like 10 records. So he can have access to only 10 plus 10, 20 records. And the rest of the 80 records, which is created by me and other users, they'll be still be private, because I have set the base model as private. And on top of it, I'm just adding one layer of permission to him. So let's see how we can do that. So that's the sharing rule, basically sharing settings and sharing rule. So earlier it was called sharing rules, and now they have changed the whole thing to sharing settings. So they clubbed together the organization-wide default and sharing rules comes into one screen under security. So let's go to account sharing rules. So here is where you will define what type of records should be shared to whom. So I'll create a new role. Say this is Gavin's access, and let's say Gavin can see. Let's see if I have any. Okay, we have one test group, right? So Gavin can see test group 1 records. So this is the explanation for that. For what I'm going to do is just a description I'm giving. So I'm telling this record type should be fire. This sharing rule should fire based on the record ownership, and also that you can also do it based on a criteria. So when I say criteria, you can define anything in the system. Say just a blind example. Any record starting with the letter T can be seen by Gavin. So that would be like account name starts with letter T. If I define the criteria like this, so I can say any records in account object with account name starting with letter T can be seen by Gavin. So what I will do is share with uh, share all these records with public group, let's say, and I will say test group one, and I would say here I forgot one more point here. Gavin should be part of test group one.
Mm.
So what it means is now the account is private. So until Gavin has his ownership, he cannot see the account.
Mhm.
But I want to give additional access to Gavin where any account, irrespective of the ownership, any account starting with the letter T should be seen by Gavin. So what I will do is first I will do a public group, or you can also do a role. So I will create a public for this example. Let's say I'm creating a public group. I will add Gavin to that group. It's not only for just Gavin, it can be for a group of people, it can be for one person. It depends on your business use case, but for this example, let's have one user under that group. So I'll add him to that group, and I will say any record starts with T can be shared to this group, which means I'm extending the visibility of that record to one particular set of group, one group of people, and I will define what type of access that record should have. So I
Mm.
can say Gavin can edit that record. So let's for now let's forget about the Gavin part. Let's see this particular group can now edit the record, read and write it. And these are all like the connected objects for the standard object. Since it is a standard object, it is a connected object. So if you are having a custom object, you won't see all these opportunity access and case access. So these are like by default, Salesforce gives you account, contracts, and assets as one connected object, and account has a connection between opportunity and account itself, and case has a connection between account. So that's why all these connected objects are appearing up here. So you can give it like all the hierarchies. You can give access to all those child hierarchies from the parent one.
Mhm.
So this is how you will define a criteria based. So let's say, no, I don't want a criteria based. So let's go with the ownership based. So I would say any, so let's consider another use case here. So the previous use case is for criteria, and this use case is for like ownership. Say any accounts that is owned by a role, mm, yeah, anything like VP sales, Salesforce. Okay. So there could be like many VPs in Salesforce, right? So there could be hundreds of VPs in Salesforce. Let's assume they are creating like two records each.
Mhm.
And I would say this test group users, for now, our example, Gavin is the only user. So this test group user should see all those VPs records. When I set the vanilla layer of security model, I told it's private, right? So
Mhm.
before defining this rule, it will be only VPs can see their own records. Now I say those VPs records should be accessible by this test group user as well. So
Mhm.
that's where it becomes like owner based. So it's pretty straightforward. Criteria based is like you can use any field to define a criteria inside that object. Owner based is like you can do only with the ownership field.
Mhm.
So owner of the record means um, you go to an account, you will have a field called owner, and it will check for that particular user. If the owner is Gavin, it will check for sorry, if the owner is Guha, it will check for my role. If my role is VP Salesforce, then it will recognize, okay, he's VP Salesforce, so I have to extend this particular record's visibility to test group one. And
Mm,
if I'm not VP Salesforce, if I'm like SVP Salesforce, so this rule will not fire
right.
because that doesn't meet the criteria. This becomes the criteria. When it is owned by VP Salesforce, when the logged in user is a VP Salesforce, then that's where when you will give the provision. So that's about the sharing rule. So let's go ahead and let's do the criteria base so that I can show you some example. Okay.
That was very thorough. Thank you, Guha.
Yeah, because this is very important in sharing settings because unless you understand this concept, there'll be many questions related to sharing model, which will say the questions will be like very pretty straightforward, but the finding the solution for it will be a little tricky. Where it will say that I don't have access to only owners can see the profile. Sorry, only owners can see the records in the system,
Mm,
and you want to extend that visibility to the particular set of group of people. So this will be the plain question. So the question will have a hidden meaning that when you say only owners can see the records, which implicitly means that you have defined your organization wide default to private. That's when only the owners can see the record, and you want to extend that visibility to one particular group of people or one particular role of people. So then you have to think in a mindset of doing a sharing rule. So that's the only way you can extend the visibility. So this is record level access, and again, don't confuse with profile or permission sets. Profile or permission sets, as I told you, it's giving access to your Excel sheet, and this is like giving access to your records inside that Excel sheet. So those two are totally different level of accesses. And so here we have public group one. Let's see what is the user in this. Okay, I don't know which user it is. That one, okay. Okay, let me go ahead and log in as that second user. I'm going to create a account. I'm going to create two accounts. One with non-T account, say user account. Okay. We need another user, I guess. So one account I have created as a system admin, and I named it as T Guha account. And the other account which I created is just plain Guha account. Let me create one more account as well. So now I have created three accounts. Now so we saw the test group user was having no. Okay, the test group is having the owner as the system admin. So the concept here is we have one standard user who created a account and another system admin user who has created the T account. So let's uh, let's go to that another user. Let's log in as that user and see if we can access this T account. I go to all accounts. I go to T account. Can do a edit here. So which means the T account is now extended to the public group people. And let's go to all account. Let's see all the accounts which we created and see if we can edit. I think this user also is system admin.
Yeah, if he's system admin, then he'll probably
Yeah,
have all the rights.
no, he's not a system admin. Hold on one second. Need to see. Let me do this. Let me change his. Sorry. Let me change his profile to normal standard user so that you can see. No, not this one. So I'm not able to see the records because I set the accounts to private. So let me do it public read only so that we can see the accounts and I'll show you that we cannot edit that accounts. So as you witnessed that when I logged in as the second user, I could not even see the account at all. So that is because we have kept the account to private, so you cannot even see the record on the list. Now if I go to account, Mm, I thought I did this. Okay, hold on.
So Danesha has a question. She says, I noticed that you're
Mm-hmm.
switching between classic and lightning. Which should I practice in to be better prepared for
Uh,
the exam?
it's a great question. So doesn't matter. These are all like underlying configurations, so you can practice in any of these. Uh, you can basically practice on any of the UI. Doesn't matter. It's switching back and forth between classic and this thing because for one user I have enabled classic, for one user I have enabled lightning experience. That's why it's you're seeing the difference. So it should be account layout. Okay, why I'm not able to see my ownership field. Okay. Hmm. Sorry guys, my whole layout is actually messed up. I was trying out something, I was working on some other POCs. So I'll demo this again back in this next session. Sorry about this for today. I thought I had this whole layout proper, but then looks like I haven't um, configured this layout.
That's okay.
So this is how the whole sharing settings will work. So for now, just understand the concept for sharing settings, and I will completely demo this with two set of records and with two users, two complete new users, and probably you can clearly show you how it will work. But now, if it is like two accounts, one account is created by user one and one account is created by user two. Let's assume user two is in the test group and user two has created account one, and user one has created T space account one. And now I have defined the sharing rules as anything which starts with T that should be shared to the test group where the user 2 belongs. That will be shared to the user 2. So since T, the record starts with T is created by user 1. Now when user 2 logs into the system, he can also see the record and he can also edit the record. So that's how the whole sharing model will work. And I'll show you the example in the next session.
Great.
Yeah, we'll start the next session with this demo, and then I'll go on to the next topics.
Well, I'm posting the Trailhead module for what we just covered today. If you want to get hands-on, I highly recommend accessing the Trailhead module that I just posted into the chat and going through it. It's basically the data security Trailhead module put together by Salesforce. And once you complete the Trailhead, like go ahead and share that on your Chatter profile and on your LinkedIn because recruiters do look at that.
Yep. So that's our agenda for today. And you guys have any questions related to these topics? And again, go ahead and start exploring the trailheads related to specific to profiles, permission sets, and sharing settings or by defaults. So all these trailheads are very important in terms of exam. And also check out those YouTube videos which Gavin has shared. That will give you more structured way of explanation for all these things. We were just running around use cases, but they will in those videos they will explain you like what is this all about. So now when you go back and see those um, videos, you will get more of a in-depth concept of what they are trying to explain.
Yeah. So I'm gonna stick around for any questions. It's 11 a.m., so we are out of time. But I thank you all for joining us, and I hope this was useful to you. And we accept any feedback. Feel free to share any feedback you have on our chatter group. You're welcome, Danisha.
Yeah, please go ahead and put your straightforward feedback. Probably myself and Gavin will regroup again and to collect feedbacks in a more streamlined way. So going forward, we will be collecting all the feedbacks and we will be refining our sessions continuously. So that will help us more on structuring out this whole platform and structuring out our course. Because this is the first time we have officially started a co-admin track and developer track in terms of certification focus. Earlier we had a study group, but we were like
Yeah.
just discussing about others' problems, and we were discussing about Q&A type of sessions. But this is like we wanted to have a very structured way so that we are going to focus on like specific group of people who are going to target the exam every quarter,
Mhm.
and we want to see really uh, positive results from that quarter results. So yeah, please feel free to leave your honest feedback. Doesn't matter how bad it is. It will really
Yeah.
help us in improving it.
Yes, that's correct. Even if it's negative, it's still helpful.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Have a wonderful Saturday, and we will connect again next Saturday, same time.
Hey, Kevin,
Yes.
just a second.